Happy Friday, everybody. What's up? This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, and I'm Anthony. He's John. We're going to talk some Cincinnati Bengals football, some things going on, and a big weekend ahead at the end of the month here. We're counting down to the NFL draft, and then the schedule release, and then lo and behold, it'll be maybe a tiny bit more free agency based on what happens with the draft, and then workouts, training camp before you know it, preseason before you know it, and we are gearing up for that. John, how you doing, my friend? Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you, Anthony. It's getting to that time where it's like I want the draft to be here, but then I realize the slow period that comes after it, and it's harder for us to do our jobs. So I want to try to appreciate these final 13 days. As much of a slow, grind as it can be, a lot of value with talking, I guess, in circles, kind of reconfirming stuff that we already know, maybe convincing ourselves of things that we don't believe, yada, 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 but exciting final 13 days here to go.
Exciting is definitely the operative word for sure. We try and do, for those who are either new to this show or maybe haven't watched it for a little while, but we try and what we've traditionally done when we've highlighted, prospects and free agents and that sort of thing, what we have traditionally done is spend an entire segment, 10, 15 minutes or so on one player. And, we still do that, and we still have done that, go with the in-depth analysis of, a particular player, maybe two on an episode. Last week, we tried something different, and we had fun with it. I think our listeners enjoyed it. And if you don't, then tell us, I guess. But we did the wheel of tackles. So this week we're going to do the wheel again, because there are a lot of prospects at another position group the Bengals may be looking at. And it's hard. We want to cover as many as we can, and we want to do a good job doing so. But it's hard to, get to each one of these players or get to all the players that we want. So what we do is we're going to do mini profiles, I guess, shorter profiles of a bunch of different people. We're going to spin the wheel, randomly pick a name, and then go with it and tell you all what we think about those players. Of course, we welcome your comments and feedback on them as well, but we're going to do that today with another position group. We've got a little bit more local news in a number of ways, so we'll start off with that in just a second. And of course, if you're new here, welcome. We love having you. You can get this show on a number of different platforms, your favorite audio streamer, and then, of course, on our YouTube channel. Underneath John and that Cincy Jungle icon there, you can click the show icon, click the subscribe button, click the bell to be notified when we go live, when new content is available. And then, of course, click the thumbs up button if you like what we're doing there. If you're watching on Facebook, click the like button there. And also, if you are on Facebook, go and join about 80,000+ people and like the Cincy Jungle Facebook page where we post all our articles, our videos, etc. So we appreciate all the support. We've been doing this for just a little while, and we appreciate all the support that you guys have showed us. All right, so let's talk Burrow, because Burrow and one set of brothers and one particular brother is kind of becoming quite a big rival, even though he, made his way to the NFL through this city, the Cincinnati. And that is the Kelsey brothers in the New Heights podcast. On it, some interesting clips, John. Burrow talking about how he feels the Bengals are built to basically the best team to be built to combat the Chiefs and what they do. And then, of course, Kelsey kind of saying it a little more colorful with colorful language than I think I'm going to, but basically saying, the coaches and the players, kind of a mutual admiration, but Burrow standing his ground and kind of digging his heels in, saying, hey, we know last year didn't go the way we wanted it to, but we are still the team that you have trouble with, you being the Chiefs, and we're standing in your way.
I mean, pretty much. We saw how the playoffs kind of went. The Dolphins tried and they froze to death in Kansas City's weather. Baltimore couldn't get it done either. The Bills, once again, unfortunately for them, failed against Mahomes in the playoffs. So, yeah, this is still the one team that has given Mahomes fits in January, at least on his home turf. The last one, aside from that, is the Patriots, who don't exist anymore under Tom Brady, or Bill Belichick. So the standard remains the same, and I know that was a thing that a lot of Bengals fans appreciated during these playoffs. If it wasn't Burrow who was going to go to the Super Bowl, I think a lot of people wanted it to be Mahomes, just so that this narrative continues to exist, where the only real challenger for the number one quarterback and the number one team in the dynasty that's currently unfolding is the team that's quarterbacked by Joe Burrow. So I think he just has that record to just kind of stand behind, and I don't think anyone can really tell him differently at the moment.
I still, you still look back at last year and how it played out with the Bengals, with the Burrow injury and all that stuff, and you go, man, what could have been had he not been injured, especially because shortly before that, you felt the Bengals were finally hitting their stride. He was overcoming another injury that he had early in the season, and you're looking at that Chiefs game at the end of the year, saying, man, this could really mean something for a lot of different reasons. And it ended up being still an important game for the Bengals. I mean, they were still theoretically alive in that game with Jake Browning, and they didn't play their best ball as comparative to that Vikings game and others towards the end of the year that they kept rolling to keep their postseason hopes alive. Ultimately, the Chiefs ended up squashing those. But the game was still important. The rivalry is still there. The intensity is still there. It's going to be interesting to see what happens going forward in this battle. I mean, obviously Burrow's health is the big thing, the big key. Venue, it seems to be played more often than not at Arrowhead between these two teams. And I think that's the case again this year. Don't they go to Arrowhead again this year? So It's like, man, can we get a game at Paycor every once in a while? But at any rate, I mean, the Bengals got to earn that though too, because that's how the playoff seeding has shook out over the past couple of years, and the Bengals have had to go there and have had to, been forced to win there. So, I mean, that's all part of it. I think the Bengals have done some good things in free agency. Chiefs, you can kind of debate that a little bit. Obviously, they've got another a legal situation happening with their receiver Rice there. They're going to have to figure all that stuff out. But, I mean, they still have Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, and so they're always going to be right there. They're going to reload probably with a lot of speed in the draft, and that defense, I think, surprised a lot of people. The Chiefs defense last year in their capabilities. You always look at the offense and how much points they score, and Mahomes. And I mean, we've gone over it in this show, John. Mahomes and the team had a bit of a dry spell towards the late part of last year, and that defense really started carrying them. And then, of course, they've kind of set out this blueprint a bit of the importance of getting interior pressure from the defensive line.
Yeah, and I think, this past year, like you said, was Steve Spagnuolo's time to really shine and show people why he's probably the best defense coordinator in the league. I know that Lou Anarumo has a good chance or a good claim at that title as well, and just for all of Anarumo's work in shutting down Mahomes. But I mean, the way that Spags has maximized that Chiefs defense without like obviously Chris Jones is Chris Jones, but there's not a ton of highly invested players on that defense, not a ton of highly drafted guys. You have Trey McDuffie and George Karlaftis, but it's a lot of elevating what they've had around Chris Jones, and Chris Jones obviously makes that whole machine go. But I think the matchups between the Bengals and Chiefs have really just been more defensive than people kind of give it credit for, because it's two mastermind defensive coordinators kind of going back and forth.
Yeah.
And, Burrow has done well enough against Spags to come out on top. And obviously, Anarumo has done the best that he can possibly in terms of figuring out a scheme and a game plan to best limit Mahomes. But that's the underrated part of the whole rivalry that I think for sure Burrow recognizes that it's beyond just him and his weapons. It's the defense that has always given him a chance to maybe score the final points on the final drive. And obviously all 4 of those games of the past 4 times have come down to like field goals, aside from the one that was just played when Jake Browning was the quarterback. So yeah, there's a lot of different dynamics to the rivalry that I don't think people on a national scale even pay attention to. They just look at the quarterbacks, and I think Burrow, that his whole thing was that we're the Bengals, that team is best suited to compete with them on any given Sunday.
The Bengals free agency period brought back one player, and brought back not the same player, but a similar style of player that they had in their 2021 run, and that is Von Bell, safety who had a huge play in the first AFC Championship game in overtime. And then, of course, you had Larry Ogunjobi in that while he was hurt at that point. But the Bengals got another guy in Sheldon Rankins that they feel that is going to be critical to what the Chiefs have been showing as a path of success, and that is that interior pressure, and having that duo of Hill and now Rankins, hopefully, getting more of that rotation in there and getting more interior pressure, lessening the double teams, hopefully on Hubbard and Hendrickson on the outside. And the Bengals just need to generate pass rush from a lot of different spots, aside from Trey Hendrickson, and Rankins hopefully provides that. And then, of course, you're hoping for that that breakout season from Joseph Osai, Miles Murphy taking that next step along the defensive line too. So that's going to be key. It's a great point that you bring up that, it's the defenses and it's the defensive coaching that has really, kind of earmarked. Yes, it's the quarterback, 2 marquee quarterbacks, but it's kind of earmarked what this rivalry has kind of been about for the most part, save for that game in 21 at Paycor.
It was great. I think slate last night, just with Burrow and Kelsey kind of going back and forth, and obviously Orlando Brown was there. He was a former Chief. Can't wait to listen to the full podcast. But it takes Joe Burrow and his rare podcast appearance for us to get talking about Bengals and Chiefs again. He did mention something to Jeff Hobson, I think, before the podcast, and it was about he's not necessarily adverse to going on to different shows. There's just not a lot of shows that just talk about football. The hell, Joe? We're right in your backyard. Come on, man.
I know.
What are we doing?
I know. He's we've talked to him a little bit when we had our Super Bowl media access, but that was during COVID era, so that was all via Zoom and whatnot. But other than that, we'd love to have an extensive sit down with Nine. We talk football, we talk Bengals football, we talk NFL football. So yeah,
more than most.
Get on it. Get on it. Yeah. But there are also, locally, and yes, go check out the New Heights podcast. Regardless of, I feel like a lot of Bengals fans have torn feelings about Travis Kelce because he's a UC guy, but he's also, done the jabroni deal about the mayor and, all kinds of stuff. So, but go check out that show, obviously. Really, really fun, and really a neat idea by them to come back and do that and really engage the Bengals side of things too. I thought that was a really unique idea, really cool venture for them. Local workout though, John, some local products having kind of their group pro day, etc. You want to run us down a little bit of the sights and sounds from that?
Yeah, so I believe the local pro day is scheduled for this upcoming Tuesday, and the list was released this week. It features mainly just UC Bearcats, Miami Redhawks, and Ohio State Buckeyes. There's a handful of guys who I think are worth mentioning because they have draftable grades, referring to Dan Brugler for the Beast. Jawan Briggs, the defensive tackle out of UC, is kind of projected to be maybe a 7th-round pick. Steel Chambers, the linebacker from Ohio State, phenomenal name. Probably going to get drafted on that name alone. He's going to be a 6th or 7th-round pick.
It's like Max Powers, right?
Yeah. Josh Proctor, who is a safety from Ohio State. I think Brugler has him ranked as a 5th-round player. Mayan Williams is a running back from Ohio State. He might go undrafted, but I know that there's going to be people listening to this podcast who are Ohio State fans who know all about him. Malik Vaughn, who's been at UC for, it feels like 8 years. He's finally entering the NFL. He's probably like 24, 25 years old, but he's another defensive lineman. D. Wiggins, a wide receiver at UC. The only difference from T is that his name starts with a D instead of a T. So if you want to Higgins, or I'm sorry, Wiggins, obviously, the difference between Higgins and Wiggins, Freudian slip there, but
DW and TH, right?
there you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are probably the notable names who are going to be, believe, practicing in the indoor facility. Early next week, there's a bunch of other local guys who played high school ball in Cincinnati who then went off to their respective colleges. But these are just opportunities for mostly guys who are either going to be drafted late or guys who aren't going to be drafted at all that have local ties, regional ties to the Bengals. The team gets to know them better and their profiles get fleshed out a little bit more to see, hey, undrafted free agency comes around. These guys are still available. They're familiar with the area. They've seen them work out.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens. But yeah, not a lot of draftable guys here, mainly just for the work done after the draft.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the Bengals seem to relish this type of pro day. They obviously they can send a lot of representatives and do all of that. But yeah, I mean these are guys that they keep diligent notes on, and they'll look hard at them. Late rounds, like you said, UDFA type of stuff, camp bodies potentially, all that kind of stuff. But and I don't want to demean anybody by saying that, but I mean that's just where kind of the draftable grades are for some of these players. But still a very important piece of the process for the Bengals, and a lot of names that people have become familiar with, even if they get drafted later, because of their own solid college careers. So. Some good names there. I think defensive line, obviously they'll look hard at that position, potentially wide receiver, like you said, maybe a couple of other spots. They've gone pretty heavy at safety. So I don't know how much safety is going to be in the cards for them. But then again, we don't know exactly what the future holds for Tyson Anderson, a guy who was a preseason star last year and then got injured again, but has the athletic profile that you love. So we'll see what happens there. The Bengals obviously looking at that group for depth purposes and whatnot. Is there, if you had, of those names that you mentioned, is there a couple that where you go, oh yeah, I think the Bengals would be all over this guy, be it late in the draft, undrafted free agent, that sort of thing?
Don't know a ton about these guys. I know Briggs. It kind of fits the mold. He's a bit on the heavier side, and when I say heavier, I mean like over 310. So he's got experience playing all over the defensive line. I think his role has changed in the Bearcats defense, throughout his career. So he has experience playing, closer to the center, further away from the center, but obviously NFL ready size, and he wouldn't cost anything more than, again, like a 7th round pick. This could be a situation where if the Bengals don't draft a defensive tackle in the first round, I kind of equated this to like the linebacker position from 2020. You could see 2 or 3 picks, later in rounds 3 and on. So he could be one of those like 2 or 3 picks that they use the defensive tackle for sure.
Yeah. I think they're going to want to shore up the depth there for sure, because they got hit by injuries, and they are just looking for, they still, Tupou hasn't been re-signed, right? So, I mean, they lost Reeder. Yes, they got Rankins, but they're going to, I think they're going to want to get some bodies in there, and capable ones. And then, that position very well could be in play the first few rounds. Obviously, some news about Tavondre Sweat, I think it was early this week, that may push him down a little further than most people originally anticipated, but we'll see what happens there. And I don't know what the Bengals are going to do about that situation with him, if they choose to overlook that or what have you. But regardless, the Bengals are, going to have a lot of eyes and ears at the local workout coming up here, and a lot of interesting players could be had, late in the draft, undrafted free agent, et cetera, and could come from this specific workout. All right. Anything else on that, John, before we start spinning some wheels?
I want to spin some wheels, man.
All right. So if you joined us last week, we did offensive tackles, and we did basically, what was it, like 10 names or 12 names on the wheel type of thing. And we basically spun it at random. I think we learned a lesson last time, and thanks to one of our listeners on our YouTube channel who tipped us off, where instead of spinning and hitting the same person again, I think we have the ability to now remove names after we pick them. So that'll be nice. So we don't have to double up on players there per se. But we're going to do wide receiver. And look, I know a lot of people are like, well, what about defensive tackle? Maybe, yeah, we've got a couple more episodes before the draft that we can do all that stuff. But I still think, John, wide receiver is a pretty sneaky big need that isn't talked about a ton. I don't know that they will go there at number 18, but you still have the uncertainty with T. Higgins. You don't know what's happening with Tyler Boyd and his future there. And then, of course, you've got question marks. Is Charlie Jones capable of stepping in right away if you move on, from Tyler Boyd here? Is Charlie Jones stepping into that slot role and, going to be able to kind of not skip a beat potentially? Is it Trenton Irwin? Can he kind of carry things? What kind of progress will Yoshi show this next year? There are a lot of questions at wide receiver for the Bengals going into this draft, and they usually like to pick wideouts, especially ones they really, really like within those first 3 rounds of the draft.
Yeah, I mean, let's just flesh this out. Why not? Why not? Like, you have Jamar Chase, who is the only certainty out of your entire receiver group from the short and long term perspective. T. Higgins is going to play this year. You have no idea what's going to happen after that. It could be tagged again. He could be leaving. They drafted Charlie Jones, I think, to be the long-term replacement for Tyler Boyd, but what sample size do you have there? You didn't really get a lot of tape out of him last year. It seemed like the transition to the slot, because he wasn't a slot receiver at Purdue, it seemed like that took a lot longer than expected. He was obviously injured. Yoshevich is good, obviously, for a 6th-round pick, but do you really want to have him just be the future starter there? There's still a lot of projection there. And then Trent Irwin's just here on another 1-year deal. He's vibing. He knows his role, and that's that. So, that's the receiving group. It's not, to me, it's a pretty decent need. And like you said, there's a trend here. Every 4 years, be it the election or the Olympics or the leap year, it's a receiver taken on day 2. That's typically the sweet spot of where they like to take these guys, unless there's a Jamar Chase or AJ Green staring at them in the face, or in some cases John Ross. It's typically going to be found between picks 33 and 100. So there's a ton of receivers that are going to fall in that range, and it just really sets them up to take a guy that kind of checks all their boxes. And we're going to talk about a couple of them.
Yeah, so a couple of things to note here, and I'm going to be the biggest hypocrite of all time because I always am the guy that makes fun of people that say there's no way those guys are going to be there, and then lo and behold, they're someone inevitably falls. That being said, we omitted the first 3 guys that we're pretty certain are not going to be there when the Bengals pick, and that would be Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors, and Marvin Harrison Jr. We're pretty certain that it's going to be pretty heavy quarterback wide receiver within that top 10, top 15 picks there. We also, even though he may kind of a little bit like Gesicki, even though he may be kind of a wide receiver-ish player in Brock Bowers, we didn't add him in here as well. So if anyone's saying, well, why isn't he in there? He's a pass catcher, sure, but he's not necessarily a wideout, a wide receiver. So we're not including him in this as well. But here are the names we've got on here, John, just for everybody. Keon Coleman, Malachi Corley, Jermaine Burton, Roman Wilson, Ricky Pearsall, Troy Franklin, Adonai Mitchell, Taj Washington, Ladd McConkey, Jalen Polk, Brian Thomas Jr., who's probably the guy that, is maybe, he's kind of on the cusp based on where they pick at 18. Jalen McMillan, who they've been linked to recently, Brendan Rice, and I already said, I believe, Keon Coleman. So we've got what is that, about 14 names or so, 12, 14 names. So we're gonna spin it. I think what we're gonna do is kind of what we did last time. Instead of maybe we'll just give each of our thoughts on each guy, if you're cool with that, John, and then we'll go from there. But we're gonna kind of give a brief overview thoughts of these guys. And you ready to spin it, bud?
Let's spin it.
All right.
Love that noise.
First up, looks like it's going to be Ricky Pearsall. All right, kick us off, John.
Ricky Pearsall is one of the handful of guys that I think can potentially break the Bengals mold here, because he's probably going to go in day 2. I know some people really love him in the 2nd round. I think he's eventually going to fall in the early 3rd. So that's a conversation for the 49th pick, or it's a conversation to see if he lasts the 80th. But he's going to be 24 as a rookie. That's already a little bit older than what the Bengals typically like in the first 3 rounds for that position. But he's fast and explosive. And it took him a while to break out at Florida. Dominator rating of 44%, breakout rating of 36th percentile. So again, both lower than the Bengals thresholds here. So what kind of stands him out and what makes him special in the eyes that the Bengals want to break their mold? Well, one of the most explosive playmakers in this entire class, and he's done it from both the inside and the outside. Obviously, phenomenal hands, and the production was decent when eventually he got featured a little bit more. It took him a while to really get there, but I think for what they're probably looking at in terms of just the types of receivers that they want, a guy that can play inside and outside because they still need some slot snaps to replace Tyler Boyd, which is also where like this whole need kind of comes into place in terms of the short term, but also the guy that can stretch the field and can make catches away from his frame. I think that skill set perfectly matches what Ricky Pearsall is. But if he is picked by the Bengals in the third round, it would be a trend breaker, and it would signify maybe they're just deviating away from these historical trends that they're looking for, and this is more along the lines of what they did last year with Charlie Jones and Josephus, who were also on the older side, who also took a long time to break out from their schools. And maybe the third round is this new cutoff point where these trends start to go away. But Pearsall, from a stylistic standpoint and what he did best in Florida, it matches pretty much perfectly what the Bengals are looking for.
Yeah, a movable piece, like you said. I think that's the big key with him is he's a guy. And by the way, he has a couple of the most phenomenal catches. There's a couple of highlights out there. I can show you a picture here in just a sec, maybe, but he's got a couple of catches that were just like, how in the world did you hang on to that football? Like you said, great hands, movable piece. I think he could be sneaky valuable to this team. I think he fits a lot of things that they like. I think he's only, he's not an overly big guy. He's like 6'1", around 200, maybe even under. So he's not overly big. So that, you may want him to bulk up a little bit, especially depending on what you're going to ask him to do. But big plays, like you said, highlight reel plays, incredible catches. And like you said, you kind of had some rise in productions once things settled themselves out at Florida there, and they kind of figured out best ways to use him. I think where he ends up going to, he's got to end up going to one of these, offensive minded coaches, these guys that have an offense, a bright mind to be able to use him in a variety of different ways. Not my favorite player in this class by any means, but I like him. And I think he kind of has the ability, if he goes to the right situation, he has the ability to be a really important piece of an offense. And one also who, you mentioned the age, one also who could kind of have a less steep learning curve to the NFL. I think he could kind of get going with things pretty early on if he gets into the right situation.
Sure, and that was the whole thing with Charlie Jones as well, which is why it's always a little bit risky. You typically want these guys to, get into the NFL a little bit earlier so that their development is more predictable and that they don't pick up on bad tendencies. But yeah, like the fact that he ended his career as strong as he did, and the fact that he's coming in with a lot of big play experience and the athleticism and just the explosive play experience, honestly. Like he was dependent on to really stretch the field and create those big moments. It would honestly, be reminiscent of a Charlie Jones type pick, but I think with a higher floor. So that's probably worth a third round pick to me.
Yeah, I'm going to try and pull up this picture here that my computer's not really working with me. Let me see if I can do this here and see if it'll work. But man, yeah, this is a little small, but I'll up it so you can kind of see it. This was an actual, and I'm gonna go off the wheel for a second. This was a catch.
Yeah.
He literally palmed the football one-handed, body totally contorted, and then I think on this one too, he not only caught that, but he took 2 hits from defenders shortly after coming down with that ball. So that that is just a crazy play, and there's a handful of those where you go, how in the world did you make that catch? So anyway, just a fun player and a fun watch of highlights and film as well. So go check that out. We don't have a ton of that for you readily available, but you can go check that out in a lot of different spaces. Anything else on him before we move on, John?
I think we said enough about Pearsall. We got some other guys to
All
get
right.
to.
All right. Let's go. Ooh. If you do not mind, sir, I will
Go ahead.
kick this one off. This is, yeah, I know. USC guy. I know. Here's the deal, and I think this thing is removing play. Yeah, removed. Okay. Here's the deal. This is a guy that I think early in the process you go, not getting a ton of love, and then you kind of looked at the name and you go, and by the way, this is Brendan Rice for the in case you didn't see that, Brendan Rice out of USC, son of Jerry Rice, and initially you go, the name and some of the production and all of that, you go, why isn't this guy getting a little bit more love? And then he ended up working out well, and buzz started to grow about him. And here's the thing with the USC wideouts, because there's a couple on this wheel here. The ball was spread around because Caleb Williams just, spread the ball around so much. There wasn't, a super overly dominant, 1,200 yard, 15 touchdown, one alpha dog receiver necessarily on this team. There were a lot of guys that put up just nice, solid numbers, and Rice was one of them. You like this size. I think he's like 6'3". He has played, I think, inside and out, so you can kind of move him around a little bit. But he is a guy I think his stock is kind of steadily rose over the last last month or so. I feel like when we were talking in January about the draft and stuff, he just wasn't talked about a ton. And now, as the draft is getting closer, he's getting a little more buzz. I don't think he makes it past night 2. And I would be, I'd be surprised if he is there in the 3rd round, but that's kind of originally where he was maybe pegged to go. Now there's some 2nd round talk for him. I like him. I think, obviously the pedigree is obvious. He's got production, he's got size, and I think he's an ascending player.
I mean, teams will always value bloodlines. I don't think there's more of a elite bloodline than the son of Jerry Rice. I suppose he didn't always grow up with him because there was I think he had a different mom or whatever. And but they started training together more and they got closer. And obviously that's definitely a topic of discussion that he's had on some of these meetings. I wasn't alive when Jerry Rice came into the NFL. I remember that he kind of had a rough first training camp, or maybe he I don't know if people expected anywhere close to what Jerry Rice ended up being, especially starting off as a rookie. And I think something similar along the lines of there's a lot more that Brendan has to do to kind of round out his game. I think people question his ability to separate. He does have experience in the slot, but 88% of his routes, I think, of the past couple of years have come out wide. But the natural hand catching ability, I think 12 touchdowns at USC was by far led the way there. I think one every 3.5 of his receptions were a touchdown, and he averaged 17 yards per reception. So the explosive ability is there. I think just the finer nuances of understanding where to be and the awareness, that's just a given, considering he probably just grew up watching film of his dad. So you have to trust that some of these things are translatable from generation to generation. He's not going to be Jerry Rice by any means, but Jerry Rice also wasn't the world's greatest athlete. I don't think Brendan is really wowing anyone with his athleticism on the field. So he does fit the mold, I think, of a 3rd round pick. And honestly, breaking out at a relatively young age and the production that he had, he checks a lot of the Bengals boxes. So honestly, he seems like a likely day 2 pick if they were to go receiver to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the fit is there. Here's the RAS. He's hovered around 8. The combine, he was, I think, mid-high 8s, and then the RAS here at the pro day, sub 8. But he's close to, it says 6'2" plus. He's got a good build at around 210. You'd like him to be a little stronger. You said the separation and whatnot. I think that is where there are some questions. And I think that's where the stock started to rise a little bit for him, because I think people were like, he's going to run kind of slow and that sort of thing. And he actually, you could see here, I think he ran a little bit better than other people would have thought he would, based on some of the stuff on tape. But like you said, a lot of touchdowns, not a lot of receptions, but high, a big play, high big play percentage per reception type of thing. So I like him. I think if the Bengals take care of, if they are in round 3, and he's there, and they've taken care of, say both of the trenches, offensive line and defensive line, and he's there. This could be a good, valuable guy for you as well going forward.
How would that conversation be about like the Mike Brown, like getting introduced to him, like, hey, your dad, he was kind of a nemesis to us, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
that whole dynamic will be fun to watch if it does kind of pan out.
Yeah. Hey, flip the fortunes, right? Bring Rice to your team, and maybe that championship way.
Would Jared be
and
welcome into the building?
I mean, I sure as hell would welcome him, but I think the interesting element here, though, like you said, is here Adonai Mitchell. I'll let you go first. He's the next guy up. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting dynamics there. I think he's got a bright future. Does Brendan Rice, and we're going to move on to Adonai Mitchell.
So Adonai Mitchell, I think, is very similar in terms to Brian Thomas Jr. I think, honestly, this is kind of a coin flip, and it might just be a preference of who you prefer. But for whatever reason, Thomas is looked at as like the top 20 lock, and Mitchell's kind of flirting with round 2, and I'm not really sure why. But I think both of them have equal amounts of risk, and specifically with Mitchell, he started off with Georgia. He was a 5-star recruit. Note, 4 of the past 5 Bengals first-round picks have been 5-star recruits, so that's kind of important. But then he got to Texas after starting off in Georgia, and he was paired with Xavier Worthy. Both of them, performed really well. I think at Mitchell was more the explosive down the field option compared to the two, which definitely translates to NFL success. And his production was very good. It was above the 95th percentile, factoring in the strength of schedule that he played, his age, and the production that he had relative to the team. But again, like, this is another guy who's slightly on the older side in terms of when he had his best season. So he's only going to be, I think he's 21 right now. He's going to be maybe 22 this year. So he's not on the older side. But again, it does matter like how soon that these guys do produce at a high level in college. And I think him and Brian Thomas are in kind of that same team. We're going to talk about Thomas later, but that's the one concern I would have with Mitchell taking him in the first round or at the 18th pick. I think ideally you want to trade back and see if he's still there, but I do think he's one of the 5 or 6 best receivers in this class, and I think like the 4.34 speed at 205 pounds and 6'2 frame, like that just kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah, 4.34, 11.4 broad jump, 39.5. So he tested, he tested well, and I think it's an interesting topic you bring up, because if you look at it from a mile high view in terms of overall age versus age of kind of their breakout college year, right? That's an interesting dynamic to kind of monitor, because you could look at it and say, well, gosh, the guy's only 21 years old, right? And so chances are he's kind of hitting his stride, and but if you see a guy like Jamar Chase when he was really, really young and explosive as an extremely young player, that's when you go, okay, well, I mean, he just hit the ground running, right? Some of these others, there's kind of that steeper incline, growing pains, and that sort of thing. And like you said, I think that does kind of describe a little bit what's happened with Mitchell, but still young overall, highly athletic. The speed is amazing, and I think that's gonna be what draws the Bengals to them. I think they want to get a lot faster. I think they want to get much more athletic, and if you can pair, let's just say for the sake of argument, you've got Higgins back, right? And we've seen Higgins kind of play inside sometimes, and obviously play outside as well. If you're able to have Chase in his 4.3, 4.4 speed, you have Higgins out there with his size, and then you have Mitchell out there with his 4.3 speed. That's a tough ass to defend. If Mitchell ends up kind of being able to show that he can be relied upon in some capacity early. So I think that speed definitely is going to be what draws the Bengals to him.
And on the topic of just breaking out, this is a good time for a correction. He was a 5-star transfer. He was a 5-star transfer from Georgia to Texas, but he was a 3-4-star recruit coming out of college. So that was my mistake. But that kind of fits. Like, I mean, you go to a really stacked program like Georgia, you can either tough it out and bide your time, or you can find a better opportunity. And obviously, he found Texas at the perfect time. They finally got some quarterbacks down there, and he got a chance to really showcase his skill set. So yeah, I think Mitchell would be a fascinating long-term placement for Higgins, because they do a lot of things differently, and obviously 2 very different athletes. And yeah. Defending him and 100%. Chase on the same time would be kind of tough.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Moving on. We've got, I don't know if we're going to get to all these because there's a lot of people on here, but we're going to try and maybe the ones that we don't necessarily spin on, we can kind of do
Yeah.
even a more um, micro one. Now, this is a player, John, that I'm gonna let you go first on him too, but this is a player that the Bengals have been kind of linked to, right? Roman Wilson out of Michigan, and he's a player that they've been linked to. I think with a visit, right? If I'm not mistaken, or he's been mock draft to them, something to that
Yeah.
effect.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
not aware of a visit necessarily, but the connection makes a lot of sense. I don't know if anyone else has noticed, but the Bengals seem to love Michigan guys. It's been
Slightly.
kind of a thing, yeah. Especially in the first couple of rounds. But Roman Wilson really took the Senior Bowl by storm. He was by
Yeah.
far like, if not, if he wasn't the best route runner, it was probably Lad McConkey, who we can also get to in a couple minutes. But just a separation king, and it should be expected of a guy who's 5'11", 185, so he doesn't come in with the biggest frame, and that's probably the biggest thing that can maybe detract him from being a likely Bengals target. Also, another guy he's going to be 23 this year. Again, it's a similar theme, right?
Older.
There's a lot of receivers in this class who are being talked about, but it took a while to really set their mark in college, and that matters because the guys like Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, even John Ross, like they all produced at a very early age. So this is another guy that would have to break the mold. But I think he, again, like the skill set that he brings is kind of similar to Ricky Pearsall, where he's a vertical slot. He has experience running that route tree, but he can also stretch the field and he can make catches away from his frame, and he can get open in a very quick manner, which is extremely important in a timing offense quarterbacked by Joe Burrow. And I think on top of all of that, like the explosive scores are great. Just his involvement in the offense is great too. So the production itself in a vacuum is fine, but he's also raved about as like a high character guy. And I think that's a very common theme with these Jim Harbaugh Michigan players. The Bengals seem to really value it almost in the same sense of what they like in Clemson along that defense. So I think Roman Wilson definitely is a locker room fit, and he fits, again, like what they're probably the exact mold of receiver they're looking for. But just like Pearsall, his data profile would, again, be another tendency breaker for them.
Gone, and I say this with as much love and admiration for Tyler Boyd, and who knows, maybe he comes back this year. I mean, he's kind of flirted with some other teams, has had interest and whatnot, but gone are the days, somewhat, of your slot guy kind of being looked at as they run the 4-6, right? They're kind of the slower and just hands and savvy route runner type of thing. I think that's what Boyd ran. I think he was in the 4-6s, if I'm not mistaken. So gone are those days, even if it's not an every down slot player. I mean, teams are seeking speed out of that spot now, not just hands and route running. And so, like you said, with Pearsall running the way he did, Roman Wilson ran the way he did, 4.39 sub 4.4. I mean, that's what teams are going to start looking for, is getting more speed out of their slot positions, getting more explosive plays, not just moving the chains type of thing, getting more explosive plays out of their slot players. And I think, that's what you saw. That's what you saw from Pearsall with the big plays. That's what you see from this kid and his speed. So that's what I think, again, will be the draw for the Bengals here. You have to make sure that you get value. I mean, you're seeing here, our guy Rick is just not really about that Roman Wilson life there.
Might be a Buckeye fan.
Emphatic no's. Yeah, maybe that's the problem. But yeah, I mean, so this is a guy, I think that's what the Bengals are. I think they still love Tyler Boyd. I think they absolutely adore what he has done for them in the locker room, on the field, been a great leader on this team. But I think they just want to get faster at that slot spot. And so I think that's where a guy like this probably comes into view for the Bengals.
Very true. And again, like that position, I don't think they wanted to just be a slot receiver anymore. I think they want to rotate guys in and out of different techniques and different positions. They may not still fully trust Jamar Chase to run a full slot tree, but I think the appeal of putting him inside and giving him more favorable mismatches without changing the offense entirely and making sure that those same three receivers can line up anywhere in the offense, I think that's a huge appeal, and it's part of the reason why, like you said, Tyler Boyd's just kind of a thing of the past at this point.
There are a number of Pac-12 guys left on this board. It's pointing at one that I love. So we'll see what happens here. We're gonna spin it again and move on after talking, and we'll be here just a couple more minutes talking more wide receivers. Which one is this going to land on? All right, Jalen Polk. Polk was the guy. And by the way, I picked him when John and I did a recent mock, and we'll do another one of those pretty soon here. Jalen Polk was the pick here, and I picked him in my in my mock draft. I like this kid a lot. I don't want to go into a ton of detail because we talked about him a couple of episodes ago, but I like this kid a lot. I know Steve Smith, who knows just a thing or two about being a successful wide receiver, particularly not being the biggest guy. Didn't he recently call? Was it McMillan or Polk that he called the next Hushmanzada? I think it was Polk that he said was the next Hushmanzada. He reminds him a lot of what he does there. I could be wrong about that. I'll double check, but I'm pretty sure I saw that. Regardless, Polk could be a very, very valuable piece of an offense. He was part of that three-headed monster at Washington this last year where they were just putting up points and points and points. And there's a lot to like about this guy. I think he could be a very, very useful piece in a lot of different offenses and a reliable weapon for someone like Joe Burrow.
I think in general, like these Washington guys are going to appeal to the Bengals just because of that dynamic with that trifecta of receivers that they have. Obviously, Rome Odunze was the alpha, and Jamar Chase and Polk and Jalen McMillan. They kind of rotated who was in the slot and who was not. And they both got their opportunities, and they both kind of shined in their own respective roles. I think Polk is the more explosive vertical option of the two, which would appeal to them. The 4.52, like I think that doesn't really encapsulate who he is as a player. I think he can still stack cornerbacks when he's given the right routes and whatnot, and he does have that true inside-outside versatility that again definitely matters. Yeah. And again, another big-time character fit. I want to read a quote from head coach Kalen DeBoer. Quote, JP is one of the toughest and strongest kids we have on the football team. Very short and sweet, but obviously I think with this team specifically, like a receiver coming into this situation, they know that Jamar Chase is the guy, and there's going to be 10 to 12 targets a game kind of filtered towards his way. Can you satisfy the offense with your specific role? You're still going to get the ball. You're still going to get opportunities. But I think having the sense of selflessness and experience of just being in that rotation, it's probably why he broke out at the age of 21. Once Michael Penix finally got into the mix and that offense was as high powered as it was. So there's a lot of reasons why I think he produced a little bit late. But again, another really good value guy to be found in the third round that fits what they need.
Yeah, I like him a lot. I haven't seen the exact quote again. I might be confusing Steve Smith with McMillan and Polk, but he did call Polk a quote unquote dog. He just loves everything about him. I think I got to double check. Is he related to the old the Huskies running back Chris Polk? Do you remember Chris Polk?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah, I gotta see here if he is. I'll have to double check on that. But anyway, Chris Polk I loved in college too, but he never, unfortunately, injuries and all kinds of stuff. It never materialized much in the pros. But I just like you said, the inside-outside versatility. Washington on both sides of the ball the past couple of years have had guys at wide receiver and at defensive back that you felt like you could move inside or outside and have a lot of good plays from them. So this is one of the guys I really like in this class. Like you said, has to meet the value there, but I think he fits a profile of what the Bengals may be looking for.
Yeah, I think Alabama's going to be fine with that head coach. They produce kind of a powerhouse a little bit.
Yeah. All right, let's spin it again. How much more time we got, John? How many more do you want to do here?
Let's do a couple more. Let's get to the big names like this gentleman. Okay. This is your choice.
My choice of what? Going first or going? Wait, what do you mean?
Well, I know Taj Washington is a USC guy, but we almost landed on
another USC guy. Yeah, another USC guy. I'm going to let you go first though this time. So you go. You hit it first.
Okay. Well, we've talked a lot about day 2 options at receiver. I think Taj Washington is more of that day 3, maybe 5th or 6th round pick. I know Brugler has him ranked kind of in between them. Not the size or the athlete that Brendan Rice, his teammate, is. Washington's only 5'10", 170 pounds, with sub 8.5-inch hands and sub 30-inch arms. So this guy's a slot only guy at the end of the day. But he didn't only play slot at USC. I think the majority of his snaps, 51%, came out wide. But
Yep.
what he lacks in size, a Gridiron Grading released like their explosive score metric, and any score over 90 is the telltale signs of like a future or potential number one receiver. He scored 97.9. So the explosive plays were just out the wazoo with this guy, and he did most of this before he turned 20 years old. So he's 23 now, but early in his career, like he was doing a lot of good stuff. And again, like you had the experience of being the guy who was in that pro style system or whatever system that was in USC. It wasn't exactly the greatest towards the end.
Whatever the hell they were doing there. Yeah, yeah.
But no, like there's experience and there's explosiveness to be found with this guy. I don't think you're looking at, again, a day 2 pick or a guy that you expect to start and take on a ton of targets early on, but someone who's experienced and someone who's got a lot of experience taking balls down the field. So, there's some stuff to like about this guy if they want to double down the position.
Yeah, there was a lot of yards after catch stuff with him, which is definitely some. I mean, there were some where he just exploded away and broke away, and it was a deep play. There were some plays that I saw that were should have been shorter gains that he made into big plays. Like you said, small. But I think when you say day 3, that may be where he goes. But this reminds me of it's the same collegiate helmet logo, but this reminds me of the Amon-Ra St. Brown thing. I saw a lot out of Amon-Ra St. Brown where, he's a little more physically, he's a little bit thicker, Amon-Ra is, but I saw a guy who worked inside and outside, and I think a lot of people saw him coming in and just said, slot only, really not going to be an explosive player. There's going to be a lot of limitations, and he's kind of broken a lot of expectations for himself. And he's a really driven player. What you just said about the, that explosive play metric and breakout age and all of that. I kind of see this guy as being an undervalued, he could be a 4th round pick because of his size, a 5th round pick because of his size, but I could see him turning into a highly productive player, maybe not the alpha dog in it because of his size in the NFL, but a very valuable member of a receiving core and kind of a quarterback's best friend in a lot of ways, the guy who just makes big plays out of short plays, so I like a lot of others above him in this class, but I think people are kind of sleeping on him a little bit, maybe justified because of his size, but that's kind of how I feel about him. And I think he could get, again, another guy who has to land in the right spot. But if he does, I think he can kind of blow away some of the low expectations that some people have for him.
Yeah, pretty classic transfer portal story. He had his second most productive season as 19 years old at Memphis, and then he transferred to USC. So he's got experience in multiple systems. But yeah, I think his data, for me, puts him in the 4th round conversation where maybe like the tape and the size will maybe knock him down. But yeah, I think this is a guy who's got a lot of going for him in terms of being someone who's undervalued for sure.
Okay, let's spin it again. And then maybe after this one, because we're coming up on it, maybe after this one, we'll just kind of, what do you know? Another Pac-12er. I think did I put too many Pac-12ers on here? I kind of tried to run the game, but there's so many of the top ones in the first few rounds are in the Pac-12. So another one of the members of the Hydra that was the Huskies offense, and a guy, John, that the Bengals. This is a guy I think they were linked to, correct?
Yes.
They've had a visit with him. Yeah. So another guy that pick what you want out of that Huskies group, right? I mean, pick what you want. They all do some similar things. They all do things differently. Odunze kind of, big guy, does it all. I see, with him, I see a little bit, Mike Evans light type of thing with him. But we're not talking about Odunze. We're talking about McMillan and a guy, John. I think the Bengals obviously like him because they're bringing him in for a visit.
Yeah, and I think compared to the other Huskies, he broke more tackles per reception. He had more yards after catch per reception. He still averaged over 2 yards per route run for his career. And again, when you're in an offense with multiple different quality receivers. That in itself is impressive. He ran a faster 40 time than Jalen Polk, but he had the majority of his experience in the slot. And if there's a Tyler Boyd replica replacement in this draft, it's probably Jalen McMillan, but he's even faster with the 4.47 speed. So another guy that produced at a really young age, breakout age percentage in the 70th percentile, and the production was above average as well. So a lot of boxes that the Bengals look for are checked here, and everything that we talked about with Polk about fitting in that dynamic, I think it definitely applies to McMillan too, because being in the slot when you have two horses on the outside, that's even more of like you're taking a back seat. And even when his number was called, it was still a lot of production to be found there.
Ton of production across the board. I'm going to try and pull up his see if we have the RAS for him, which was pretty dang impressive. He kind of hovered in the 8s and the 9. The first one out of the combine, it was a 9.33 unofficial, and then I think the pro day one put him at like mid 8s. Let me see if I can pull this up and share it for you guys. But again, a player that you see here, his size grade, okay, 6'1", 197, like you said. The explosion, though, when you look at the vertical and the broad, tested great. Good in the speed category, 4.47 speed, so a little faster than I think people maybe thought. Not so great on the 10-yard split there, the initial explosion, and then agility grade was good as well. So all across the board, pretty solid on the RAS profile. But again, just it's almost like, if you pick one of those guys, yeah, they do different things, but it's hard to go wrong with any one of those three Washington players, it seems.
He was if he's not the best route runner in this class, he's one of them. Like he gets in and out of his breaks phenomenally, and it's a theme with this class too. But you don't get 1,600 yards by accident if you can't get open. So
yeah. All right, so let's kind of talk. I don't know if you want to talk about all of the remaining 6 or just a couple of them briefly. We just couldn't get to all the names on there, but do you want to go to? Do you want to go where the arrow is just currently pointing right now, because he's kind of one of the first round options?
Is that Brian Thomas?
Yeah,
sure. Let's talk about him.
Okay.
Probably the closest. If not, he would be the T. Higgins mold, but just even faster. I think.
Yeah.
His game is just get down the field and pluck the ball out of the air, and being a teammate of Malik Neighbors, doing different roles with that. Like obviously they have a trust with the LSU program at that position as well. The production is there's no question about that. He's coming in at 21 years old, and also forced a lot of missed tackles, 22% missed tackles forced rate over his career, but mostly on the outside. So not really a guy that will produce a ton if T. Higgins is healthy, but obviously there's a question of that durability in the short term, and how many reps can he get as a rookie this year when he's really just on an outside-only type guy. So I don't think he's going to be the pick at 18, but if they were to pick a receiver there, he's probably the guy that checks the most boxes.
You said it right there. I mean, Mike Brown loves talented wide receivers who look the part. And when you're talking about 6'3", 210, 4.33 40-yard dash, Mike Brown's going to salivate over that. And when you're talking about having this stalemate with T. Higgins long term, and you see a guy that can kind of do a lot of the same things and run at a faster speed, that's a pretty big deal. I think also, John, what's appealing in terms of the Bengals with this player here is that Burrow excels and is not afraid to make tight window throws. And this is a guy I think could fit well into that type of system where he'll out position other players. He'll get down the field and, like you said, pluck the ball out. And I think that bodes well in this offense and with this quarterback because of the tight window throws and whatnot. So I don't know, man. I mean, I know conventional wisdom says offensive tackle, defensive tackle with that number 18 pick. I know there's been a lot of other people in the brain trust in the front office that have kind of taken more of the driver's seat thing. Something in my gut says Mike Brown would potentially pound the table for a guy like this, despite other needs being glaring.
Yeah, it's just a matter of if he still has that willingness to do so anymore. I don't think that's been a thing with them and for a couple of years. Maybe a certain Jackson Carmen pick was maybe the last time that sort of thing happened. But no, I
Yeah.
think Brian Thomas is grading now as a clear first round player, and he'll be a part of the conversation at the very least if it comes to that.
Yeah. So we talked Corley because you picked him in your mock draft. So if you go back a couple episodes, we'll try and pin that in the info there too. Smaller school guy, brings special teams ability, etc. We talked a lot about him. So go back a couple episodes and we did our mock draft, and you can hear more about him. Really, I mean, there's two more guys that I kind of would like to touch on. But if you, who do you? I want to defer to you here. Who would you like to talk about?
Actually, let's do this because I believe you're talking about Troy Franklin and Ladd McConkey. Am I right?
You read my mind, friendo.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's do this because I think they're both projected. If the Bengals are going to take them, it's going to be at 49, and there's no guarantee that either of them
round
are going to be there. Let's just say that they take an offensive tackle in round 1, and they have both these guys available to pick. Who is your preference and why?
I would. Oof. I waver on that and where McConkey's going to go. I mean, some people think that he's got first round skills, but people think that he's just going to be a second round guy. I shouldn't say just, but I've been all about Troy Franklin. I think he's a versatile guy. I think he's got speed. I think in this offense he could be just lethal. And again, one of those guys that was in another high-powered Pac-12 offense and put up a lot of numbers and part of a group that just was explosive. So I've been all about Troy Franklin. Ladd McConkey, though, is really intriguing to me because he tested better than I thought. He got sure hands, and a guy I think is another movable piece in an offense. But I think I would give the edge to Franklin, and I can see also why people would disagree and go the other way.
So I have Franklin as my 4th graded receiver. I have a late first on him. I think all the data points to him, no matter where he lands, has a really good chance of hitting. And McConkey has some more question marks in regards to his age and how well he produced at Georgia, which is another big school thing. So if McConkey were to fulfill his potential, he would have to go to the perfect place. And I just happen to think that the perfect place is the Bengals with Joe Burrow. Honestly, it's a match made in heaven. Like the routes that he runs the best, I think the routes that Joe Burrow would value the most. He gets open probably better than anyone else. Regarding who he did it against, it was all SEC competition. He did it on the outside despite the lack of size in the frame. And he's proven it time and time again throughout this pre-draft process that he has all the goods of being a next-level separator in the NFL.
Yeah.
So, the explosiveness, the forcing missed tackles, the yards after catch, all the things that are really valuable, specifically in today's game. McConkey, I would have to knock some part of his profile, but there are outliers for a reason, and part of that is just finding the perfect fit in the destination, and him being the 49th pick in this offense, I think would be the perfect destination for him to really realize his maximum potential for sure.
Yeah. I'd give the slide. I just think, like you mentioned, Franklin does a lot of different things or elements to his game. He does them across the board and he does them well. And that's what I value. I think there are a couple more questions, like you said, with McConkey for me than with Franklin, but I think both would be good fits for the Bengals there. We didn't get to a couple of others. There was, who was it? Burton and Jermaine Burton. And we talked about Corley before, and then Keon Coleman. So we got to most of these. We got to a lot. And we went a little long, but we have mini profiles on 10 to 12 wide receivers for you in this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed that. The wheel's been fun. It's been fun. It's been a labor of love, but it's been fun. So anyway, let's drop the mic and get out of here. What do you got for us, Sean?
Just like we talked about with tackles, we're talking about this position for a reason. I think we can all expect that receiver is going to be a target for them on day 2. Just, I guess, final thoughts on those guys. Jermaine Burton's got a lot of character concerns. I think that's a good reason maybe to not really mention him. And Keon Coleman, he's a less productive T. Higgins. I think that encapsulates who he is as a prospect pretty perfectly. So I wouldn't expect Burton to be a Bengal because of the issues that he has going on, but Keon Coleman's a dark horse. I wouldn't rule him out either.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head with a lot of that stuff you just said there. I've kind of have this expectation in some order, let's just say, for instance, the Bengals keep their 4 picks within those first 3 rounds that they currently possess. I think it's offensive line, defensive line, um, wide receiver, and not necessarily in this order again, but in some order there. And then I waver: is it running back? Is it corner? At some point, I think a lot of people go, "Why running back?" You've got Zach Moss on a short-term deal. You don't really have the, they're talking about going by committee. You don't really have the alpha dog. Maybe you want a little more explosiveness, even if it's an ancillary player in the group. So right now, I think I know that 3 positions that will be drafted within those first 4 picks will be wide receiver, defensive line, and offensive line. And then I'm kind of wavering. They love those corners. They love those early corners, and something's got to make sense there too. But I think they've gone pretty heavy on defense and free agency, so maybe they go a little more on offense in the first handful of picks. We'll see. But I think one of these names, there's a ton we went through. One of these names that we mentioned, I would expect the Bengals to pick probably before night 2 is done. Maybe if they wait, maybe it's a Taj Washington type of thing on day 3. But I would be surprised if the Bengals didn't go wide receiver within those first 4 picks.
Never forget the route. Wow, what a nice. Never forget the wild card though. Bengals have surprised us before, taking a safety in round 1. Taking a safety in round 3 last year. There's always going to be one position that, they took one there. That's interesting. But
yeah,
this is the Bengals and wide receivers. There's a pretty clear track record.
Yeah, they haven't taken a tight end in the first couple of rounds since Drew Sample. They haven't drafted a tight end the last 2 classes, right?
Yeah.
So they, I don't know that this group is valuing that. And unless there's a Bowers situation, and I don't know that that's going to happen, and I don't even know if they would pounce or not. But anyway, we're going to get out of here. This is the Orange and Black Insider. You can get this show through the Cincy Jungle Facebook page, your favorite audio streamer. You can get it on our YouTube channel underneath John and that Cincy Jungle icon. Click that show icon, the Orange and Black Insider show icon, to subscribe. It'll pop up a subscribe button. Oy, and click that. Click the bell to be notified when we go live, when new content is available. And then, of course, give a thumbs up to our video if you like what we're doing. Check us out on Facebook. We've got a lot of people checking us out on Twitter, which is awesome. Thank you so much, through a variety of different accounts. Appreciate that. And been fun. The wheel's been tiresome, but it's also been a lot of fun. And maybe we'll keep doing it going forward, just to touch on a number of different prospects. The NFL draft's coming soon. We're going to be giving you all kinds of more content, and we're going to be hammering you stuff. John, have a good weekend, buddy.
You as well, man.
All right.